Since the early part of this century, with the development of smartphones, social media, online shopping, and powerful internet search facilities, we've become an always on society. For many people, the internet is the lens through which they see their world, but it's a digital world, a virtual world. Many of these platforms capture and process every piece of data about us and our online activity and use AI algorithms to manipulate and control us. AI is also used by the state in facial recognition systems, removing our freedom to move about privately. In this study series, Masters or Slaves, AI and the Future of Humanity, we're exploring how AI is impacting what it means to be a human being made in God's likeness and what we need to do to protect our ability to be faithful image bearers so that we can be masters rather than slaves of AI. We've looked at two ways in which AI is impacting our ability to reflect God's image, our minds through increasingly stealing our reasoning and decision making, and shaping our relationships through our interactions with digital assistants and robots. In this session, convenience or freedom, we'll look at another area of the image of God in us that needs protecting if we are to be faithful image bearers, and that is privacy and freedom. Most people have grudgingly accepted that their data on social media or shopping platforms isn't private. They do so because the platforms are so convenient. But do we realize the extent to which information about ourselves is used against us, all to fuel big tech and advertisers' growth and profits? As the expression goes, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Although technically we have consented to our data being used when we engage with a platform, in reality, it's not what is called informed consent. To provide such consent would require each user to trawl through hundreds of contracts with the platform partners and third parties, a process that's clearly unrealistic. We could therefore view the transaction as deceitful, in that most people don't really know what they are signing up to. Although the Bible is very clear that we should not deceive one another, we're in danger of allowing ourselves to be deceived by big tech and their online engagement platforms for the sake of convenience and a free ride. We've already seen in an earlier session that AI algorithms used in social media, digital assistants, and robots can shape and undermine authentic relationships with others, something that diminishes our ability to reflect that aspect of God's image or nature in us. Social media has other dangers too, not only in undermining our privacy by knowing more about us sometimes than we do ourselves, but it's also damaging our democracy and freedom, as the Capitol Hill riots in the USA in January 2021 all too well illustrated. These platforms become a portal for the dissemination of fake news and conspiracy theories. Fake news, for example, is read 6 times more than genuine news. But if we rely on these platforms for our news, who is to know what is true and what is false? AI algorithms don't discriminate between fake news and real news. They're tuned to increase engagement. And if that's achieved by filtering out real news and pushing us down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole, then the companies have succeeded in their mission. The problem with these sites is not a lack of human oversight, really, but the toxic algorithms that are needed to keep people on the platform so that the advertisers are kept happy. The only real solution is to remove the algorithms, but that would break the advertising business model. So on top of invading our privacy, manipulating us to spend longer on these platforms and shaping our relationships. The very nature of these platforms, with their thirst for our data and engagement, is a threat to our democracy and our freedom, even our free speech and freedom to preach the gospel. We'll look at what the Bible teaches us about freedom and privacy in a moment. But before we do, there's another area of our freedom that is under threat from the deployment of AI algorithms. And that is from the state's use of facial recognition and gait analysis systems for mass surveillance. The state in China uses facial recognition to track ethnic groups like the Uyghurs and even underground church leaders, or in fact, anyone it deems a criminal. Although highly controversial, Western governments are also using the technology to counter terrorism. Yet these systems are prone to bias, as we saw in our first session, and they aren't 100% accurate. This can result in wrongful arrest and injustice. Humans are, of course, also not perfect, but injustice is exacerbated when computers make decisions and there is no easy appeal to a human court. One of the Ten Commandments tells us that we shouldn't bear false witness. But aren't we doing just that when we delegate decisions to an imperfect AI system, especially when they can have serious consequences like wrongful arrest or penalties? Smart cities are in vogue around the world, where a multitude of sensors can be used to improve their efficiency, allowing bins to be emptied when full and traffic lights to be operated in a way to maximize traffic flow, reducing journey times. This efficiency comes at a price, and that is giving up data from our smartphones and vehicles, allowing the smart city operator to track our movements and model our data with machine learning algorithms. In parts of China, this is extended to financial transactions, online activity, and the use of profiling to determine a social credit score for each citizen. Some citizens in China see this as very convenient and improving their safety. But at what price? Should we as Christians be concerned about these various ways in which AI systems are invading our privacy and removing our freedom? To answer that, we need to turn to the Bible and see how this impacts our ability to reflect God's image. If we regard information about us and our activities as part of us, a digital signature, if you like, then we should be concerned because the Bible has a lot to say about the value of life and personal property. The Old Testament teaches us that we should respect each other's property and that it rightfully belongs to us. Another of the Ten Commandments instructs us not to steal, and there are penalties for theft, often restitution with interest, or what we might think of as a fine. Should the state be allowed to capture and steal our digital identity, how we look or walk, and then use it to track us without our knowledge? This is policing without consent and is surely a violation of the moral law. Many who are not Christians, including various lobby groups around the world, are opposed to the state using such surveillance systems. Usually, they come at it from a human rights perspective. But it's interesting to note that actually human rights have their foundation in the Bible's teaching. From a Christian perspective, perhaps the ultimate answer to the question that we've raised about privacy and freedom comes down to recognizing that human beings made in the image of God should be allowed to bear that image with dignity. That means respecting privacy and freedom of movement and association, actually part of the Bill of Human Rights. When the state curtails these rights, as they do in some countries like China and even in the West, we're on a slippery slope and captive to the whims of our changing governments and their ideology and values. In our next session, autonomy or responsibility, protecting our morality, we will return to the challenging question of whether we should allow things like self-drive vehicles and autonomous weapons to make moral decisions on our behalf.